Hello and welcome. Today we will be exploring the Canadian National City Spur. It is a branch out of Pontiac, Michigan that covers roughly 8 miles, but it is in its declining years, so today we will walk along what's left of it. The Grand Trunk Western historically had many lines that came through and originated in Pontiac. The one that we will be following today is the remainder of the former Cass City subdivision, which stretched from Pontiac all the way into the thumb of Michigan. The so-called Cass City Spur is made up of a stretch of this historic line, as well as what's left of the Pontiac Beltline subdivision, and an extension at the north end built in the 80s to serve a General Motors plant. You can pause the video here if you would like to examine this map closer. We will be starting our journey here, just north of the line's origin at Pontiac Yard, where it goes through a heavily wooded area. The section we are approaching here is what's left of the only part of the line that still receives service. Interestingly, the rails here don't appear to be in terrible condition. Currently, only half of what this branch used to be is still used, and the rails are cut only about 3.5 miles up the line. Looking south, we can see the turn just after Pontiac Yard. All that is here is just a bungalow and some trackside scanning devices that I'm not sure are still in operation or not. This area here is what's left of the Pontiac Beltline sub, which was a short loop that encircled Pontiac on the north side. It's now part of the Cass City Spur, since the rest of the Beltline sub was torn up decades ago. Looking north, we can see the turn east on the northern side of Pontiac. Walking alongside the track for a bit. Here we see the switch that once connected the lead track of a yard that was once here. This is where we will head next. Walking along the grade of the yard lead track, it's getting hard to tell that there was once a track here. It was torn up in the early 2000s along with the yard it went to. This buried tie plate is evidence of what was once here. Just a little further to the yard. Here is the clearing where the yard began. We will not be exploring in there simply because there just isn't much to see. And Pontiac isn't a safe place, so best not to stick around. The next location on the line is the Y that joined the Cass City sub and Pontiac Beltline sub. Its south end is the entrance to a GM stamping plant that may or may not still be rail served. The rails here are in decent shape, and the crossing relay box is new, having been replaced in recent years. The north end of the Y is the continuation of the Cass City Spur, and the southern end has a few interesting bits to it. The crossing of Walton Boulevard is on the north side. If we travel south on the Y, we see by the rusty rails that this track has clearly not been used in a while. we can see the switch onto the grade of the Beltline sub. And past it, we see where the crossover once was, where the Cass City and Beltline subs crossed each other. The stamping plant is rumored to still be rail served, but I don't know of any facts to back up this claim. Looking south down the former Cass City subdivision, the rails end about a block down. Looking north, we see the continuation of the line. Next up, the road crossing at Collier Road. The official end of track is located here, as well as the last known industry to still be served by the line. Looking north towards Great Lakes Crossing, looking south towards the Y a few miles down. Here is a closer look at the end of the track. The scrap dealer here has been served by this line for almost 60 years. So we have more to see to the north. Our next stop is Great Lakes Crossing Drive, which has nothing to do with the fact that there is a crossing, but rather the large Great Lakes Crossing Mall located here. This is the first crossing on the line that has useful sidewalks. The rails are pretty buried here. We can see that the bungalow here is of an older style. Looking south towards Collier Road. During the summer months, the line here gets overgrown with these tall grasses. Here is a more open stretch of track. Looking north again, we see the busy I-75 overpass in the distance. Luckily, we are out of Pontiac now, so it's much safer here. This cut-off section of the line was last used sometime in the mid-2010s, when a circus train traveled up to the now abandoned Orion Yard. The GM plant that was served by this line stopped receiving rail service around 2011. The line travels through a swampy area here before reaching the highway, and the tracks are overgrown for the most part. This overpass has clearly seen the effects of time. Next, we move to the crossing of Joslin and Brown Roads. This is one of the more notable points on the line due to the crossing's irregular geometry. The bungalow here is in good shape and even had its signs replaced in recent years. All the crossing signal lights remain on the traffic light poles, and there's a lot of them. Looking south here, we can see the line coming out from under I-75. Interestingly, most of the bungalows on this line refer to the Holly sub on their signs. I'm not sure why this is, considering this line was once its own subdivision. At the north end, we can see some neat old power poles buried in the leaves. And we see a more uncovered portion of the line as it continues north. Moving further north, we are now at the northern of the two Joslin Road crossings. They're both hard to access by walking, so we're skipping the southern one. Coming south towards the crossing, we see how nature has reclaimed this line. At this crossing, the line travels next to a lake and through some swamp. The bungalow here has been replaced with the others and is also lettered for the Holly sub. Now we come to the West Silver Bell Road crossing. Looking south at the pedestrian crossing, well, it's pretty rusty here. I'm not sure of the rail weight on this branch as it stands right now. The power line parallels this line coming from the Pontiac substation near Orion Yard. It follows the track all the way into Pontiac. Some interesting markings on the ties. Sometime around 2011, Canadian National redug the drainage ditches on this line from here down to Brown Road, but that's probably the last maintenance this part of the track has gotten. West Silver Bell Road has been repaved twice since this track went out of service, and they paved right over the rails, but they're still under there somewhere. None of the crossing signals or markings have been replaced here since the early 2000s. Okay, the last location, the Giddings Road crossing. We will be able to see the abandoned Orion Yard here, and the GM Orion assembly plant. The Giddings Road crossing has been paved over a couple of times, but the rails here have also been removed through the crossing. This is because General Motors supposedly owns this section of track here and is trying to get rid of it. The rails coming from the yard have been pulled up very recently, maybe even as recent as this summer. There was once a short track leading off through here to serve this beer distributor. That was torn up around 2010. Entering the yard, we can see the extent of the abandonment. The rails are mostly gone. This yard at its maximum had around 19 tracks running the full length. Now, all but 4 of those tracks remain, and most of the switches have been taken out. Here is the yard office, covered in plants and such. Satellite imagery of this yard shows that auto racks once dominated the length of it when it was in use, but unfortunately times have changed. This whole area has fallen into disrepair and its fate is unclear. Heading back to the road. Now heading back towards the plant. This section here was double tracked up until the late 90s, and now even the single track will probably be torn up soon. The General Motors plant is undergoing big changes to convert to an EV plant, so who knows what the plan is for this line. What we do know for sure is that the tracks inside the plant have been mostly taken up. Although it seems that GM is taking a piecemeal approach to this process. The track passes under Silver Bell Road and stops at the gate. So that's what's left of a once busy line. Who knows what the future holds for it once they finish construction on the plant. For now, it sits in disrepair. Thanks for watching if you got this far, and please subscribe. I will explore more lines like this in the future, so stay tuned and bye for now.